Hi, friend. Welcome to Rainy Tales, a quiet place for gentle stories told beneath the sound of rain. Now, let's begin tonight's story. The first drops came quietly, as if the night itself had exhaled. They tapped gently against the window pane, tracing thin silver paths that caught the dim lamplight. The world outside blurred into softness streetlights haloed, rooftops shimmered, and the steady rhythm of rain began its old familiar song. Inside, the room was warm and still, scented faintly with jasmine tea and the woody calm of old furniture. It was the kind of evening that invited slowness, that asked nothing but one's quiet attention. I sat by the window, watching the water glide down the glass, and for a long moment, I simply listened. Rain has its own language, a language that doesn't need to be learned, only remembered. Each drop seemed to carry something from far away, something that brushed the edge of my memory like a half-forgotten tune. Then, somewhere between the steady drumming of rain and the hum of the old lamp, I heard it. A soft humming dot. It wasn't loud, barely there at first, just a thread of sound weaving through the storm. A woman's voice, gentle, low, and calm. It rose and fell with the rhythm of the rain, like the two had been born together. I couldn't tell if it came from the next apartment or from my own memory, but I knew that melody. I closed my eyes, and it all came back not as images at first, but as feelings. Warm evenings with fog curling outside the window. Her sitting on the floor beside the heater, knees pulled close, eyes half closed as she hummed along to the sound of the storm. She never sang with words, only the tune. It was something she said her grandmother used to hum, a melody passed down like a soft secret. I remember asking her once what it meant. She smiled then, her lips barely moving. "It doesn't mean anything," she said. "It just feels like home." The memory felt so close that I could almost reach out and touch it. I looked around the room, at the cup of tea cooling on the table, at the notebook lying open with no words written yet. It was as if the years had folded back into that small space again, where the sound of rain and her humming had once been the only things that mattered. Outside, thunder murmured far away, not angry, just weary. The light flickered slightly, then steadied again. I pulled the blanket closer and let the rhythm fill me. There was something deeply kind about the rain that night. It didn't rush or demand. It just existed, soft, even patient. I found myself humming too, almost without realizing it. The tune slipped out between breaths, shaky at first, then steadier. It matched the pattern of drops on the glass, the soft creak of the chair beneath me. And as I hummed, I felt something loosen in my chest, like a knot untangling itself. Maybe that's what rain does. It finds the old songs in us and brings them back to life. Not to make us sad, but to remind us that we were once tender enough to feel them dot. The lamplight grew warmer as the storm deepened. I thought about how many nights had passed since she'd last hummed that song beside me. Years, maybe decades. But the melody had never really left. It had just waited. Through the window, the world shimmered, quiet houses breathing in rhythm with the rain, the air thick with the scent of wet leaves. Somewhere, I imagined her still humming, wherever she was, and somehow it didn't make me lonely anymore. It just made me still. I lifted the cup of jasmine tea and took a slow sip. The warmth spread through me, blending with the hum in my chest and the steady music outside. And for that moment, everything that passed, the rain, the distance, felt whole again. The humming returned the next night, softer still, as if it had crossed the distance of years to find me again. It began somewhere between the sigh of wind and the whisper of rain against the glass, the kind of sound you don't notice until your heart does. I didn't move. I just listened, the way one might listen for a heartbeat in the dark. The room was wrapped in amber light from the same old lamp, its glow spilling over the wooden table and pooling in the quiet corners. My cup of tea steamed faintly beside an open notebook, though the pages remained empty. Words felt unnecessary. The melody itself said everything that language couldn't. Her voice had always been like that, never loud, never seeking attention. She would hum while folding laundry, while waiting for water to boil, while standing by the window watching storms roll in. The song seemed to belong to her as much as her shadow did. Even now, in her absence, it filled the room like breath. I remember the first time I heard her hum it. It was late afternoon, and the city was rinsed in soft rain. I'd stopped by her place after work, tired and quiet. She handed me a towel at the door, laughing softly when she saw my soaked shoes. Then, while I sat on the couch drying off, she stood by the window and started humming. No instruments, no lyrics, just her and the rain, meeting somewhere in the middle dot. It was such a small thing, yet something in it reached me in a way nothing else had. I had spent years chasing noise, deadlines, crowds, conversations that left echoes but not meaning. And here she was, humming to the rain as if the world had no need for anything more. Back in the present. I could almost see her there, the curve of her shoulder in lamplight, the slow movement of her fingers tracing circles on the window pane. I could hear the faint hitch of breath between notes, that human imperfection that made her humming feel alive. I leaned back in my chair, eyes half closed, and let memory and sound merge until they were one. The rhythm of the rain outside matched the calm inside my chest. It was strange how peace could arrive through something so fragile. A soft knock echoed, only the loose branch outside tapping against the glass. I smiled at the sound. It was the kind of night where even small noises seemed gentle. The world felt quieter than usual, as if it too had paused to listen. Somewhere deep in the melody, I began to notice something new, a subtle change in tone, a higher note that lingered longer before returning to the familiar rhythm. It was as though the song had grown older, carrying time within it. Maybe I had too. I whispered into the quiet, "You still remember it, don't you?" Of course, there was no answer, only rain, endless and patient. But somehow, I felt certain she did, that somewhere, in another room, she might also be listening to a storm, her lips moving with the same melody. Maybe the distance between two people wasn't measured in miles, but in silence shared across the rain. The thought made me feel small but whole. I let the hum drift through me again, softer than before, a vibration of something tender and wordless. I realized then that I didn't need to chase closure or meaning. Some things, like her song, weren't meant to be finished. They were meant to be continued, quietly, endlessly. Every time it rained, the light flickered once more, steadying into gold. I placed my notebook aside and simply sat there, watching the storm move across the night. There was no need to write anything. The story was already being told, not on paper, but in sound, in breath, in memory. And as I listened, I caught myself humming again, the same tune, the same warmth. It filled the space between heartbeats until there was nothing left to miss. Only the gentle truth of the moment, that some songs never really end. Outside, the rain deepened its rhythm, carrying the melody through the air like a promise kept. The rain had lingered for days now, as if the sky had forgotten how to stop. Each evening arrived with the same silver hush, and with it, that soft humming that wrapped itself around the room like a gentle scarf. I'd begun to welcome it, the way it calmed the air, the way it made silence feel alive. That night, the lamplight glowed honey gold against the walls, and steam curled from the surface of jasmine tea in slow, sleepy swirls. The scent filled the room, floral, warm, slightly sweet. I always brewed it the same way she used to. 1 spoon of loose petals, water just below boiling, steeped long enough to turn the color of pale amber. She had said jasmine tea was best enjoyed in the rain, because the air softened its perfume. And now, even after all these years, I found she was right. I set the cup near the window and watched the raindrops slide down the glass in crooked lines. Each droplet caught the light, forming tiny rivers that met, parted, disappeared. Beyond the window, the world was blurred. Streetlights glowing through mist, a faint silhouette of trees trembling in the wind. It all looked like a watercolor painting still wet from the artist's hand. I closed my eyes for a moment and listened. The melody had returned again, clearer tonight, as if the storm carried it closer. I didn't know whether the sound was real or imagined, and maybe it didn't matter. Memory can be as tangible as breath when it chooses to be. There was a time when evenings like this were shared. She would sit cross-legged on the floor beside the table, her long sweater draped around her knees. I would read quietly, and she would hum, sometimes unconsciously, as though the music simply passed through her instead of being made by her. The lamp would cast our shadows on the wall, gently swaying in rhythm with the flame. We never needed to speak much. The sound of the rain filled the spaces between words, and somehow that was enough. I remember once she asked, "Do you ever think silence can be a language?" I had laughed softly then. "If it is, you're fluent." She smiled, that small, thoughtful smile that always seemed to hide 1,000 quiet meanings. Then she poured more tea, the steam rising like small ghosts between us. Now, as I lifted the same kind of porcelain cup, I felt that moment reform itself in the present, the scent, the warmth, the pause before the first sip. It was as if time folded inward, letting me borrow one more evening from the past. The rain grew heavier, drumming softly against the roof. I could almost hear her humming beneath it, the notes threading between drops. It wasn't a sad sound, more like comfort shaped into melody. A sound for healing, not remembering. I let it wash through me, the way tea warms the body after a long, cold day. Every sound in the room seemed to join in. The ticking of the clock, the faint hum of the heater, even the whisper of my breath. Together, they made a kind of quiet orchestra, a hymn to the simple act of being here, of being alive. Maybe this is how memories heal, not by fading, but by softening. They stop pressing so hard against the heart and begin to rest gently within it. The tea had cooled by the time I finished it. I didn't mind. I left the empty cup beside the lamp and opened the window a little. Cool air drifted in, carrying the scent of wet earth and faraway thunder. I leaned close to the sill, letting the rain's mist touch my face. And then I hummed again, softly, uncertainly. The same tune. I wasn't sure whether I was joining her or answering her, but the sound felt right. It filled the quiet, wrapped itself around the smell of tea, and rose into the night air where rain was waiting to carry it. For a few long breaths, the world felt smaller. Just this room, this lamp, this lingering warmth, and a song shared between the present and the past. By the fourth night, the rhythm of rain had become a language I no longer needed to interpret. It spoke gently against the glass, steady and sure, as if it had always known the way back to this room. The window, once a silent witness, now felt almost alive, the surface breathing with fog, the frame creaking softly as wind brushed past. I drew closer, resting my palm against the cool glass. The temperature difference left a faint print, like a memory trying to stay. I traced the raindrops as they slid down, each path a wandering story that vanished before reaching the bottom. The city beyond shimmered under the soft blur of rain, lights bending and breaking into small constellations on the wet street. Some nights, I wondered if the window remembered everything that had ever happened in front of it. Laughter, quiet meals, small arguments that ended in silence. Her humming while the rain painted the same silver lines it did now. Windows see so much, yet never speak. They are patient witnesses of time's gentle passing. The humming began again, Not from beyond the walls, not from memory, but from within the rain itself. It was faint, but undeniable. Each drop seemed to carry a fragment of that melody, blending sound and water into one seamless current. I felt as though the window were singing back. I closed my eyes and let the sound wash over me. Suddenly, the years folded away, and I was no longer alone in this room. I was young again, sitting beside her while she hummed without realizing I was listening. Her voice had been light but steady, and when she paused, she would smile slightly, as if catching herself mid-thought. I used to think she hummed to comfort me, but perhaps she was comforting herself. A quiet way to steady the heart. Once, during a long storm much like this one, she had told me, "The rain has good memory. It always finds the same streets, the same rooftops. Maybe that's why it feels familiar. It's been here before." I hadn't thought much of it then, but tonight, those words felt truer than ever. The rain had returned, and with it came her voice, her warmth, her quiet faith in the beauty of small things. I watched as the droplets gathered along the edge of the glass, swelling until gravity pulled them down. One by one, they fell, tiny, transparent worlds breaking apart to become something larger. I thought of how people do the same. We drift, we fall, we join something greater, unseen. On the windowsill sat an old photo frame turned face down. I hadn't looked at it in years. The wooden edges had worn smooth from time, the corners faded. Slowly, I picked it up. Inside was the picture of that night by the lake, both of us soaked to the bone, laughing like children, her hair plastered to her cheeks, her eyes bright. I could almost hear her humming through that smile. The rain outside thickened, each drop a note in the same endless song. The reflection of the lamp trembled in the glass, flickering in time with the rhythm. I realized the window wasn't just reflecting what was, it was mirroring what had been. Every shimmer of light, every bead of water, carried pieces of her still. I leaned closer and whispered, "I remember." My breath fogged the glass, soft and temporary. Through it, the blurred city lights looked like lanterns floating on water. The rain softened its tempo, turning from rhythm to hush, like a lullaby closing its final verse. And as I stood there, humming the last few notes she once did, I understood that memories don't always live in the past. Sometimes they live in windows, in the spaces between reflection and rain, in the quiet places that still listen when we have nothing left to say. The storm outside breathed one last sigh, and the room filled with stillness. The melody lingered only in my chest now, quiet but alive, as if waiting for the next rainfall to be heard again. On the fifth night, the rain began earlier, soft as a whisper at dusk, long before the city had dimmed its lights. I was sitting at my desk, tracing the rim of a cold teacup, when I noticed how still everything had become. Even the air felt like it was holding its breath. Outside, the world was wrapped in a silver haze. Inside, time slowed, as if waiting for something unspoken to arrive. I opened the drawer of the desk, one I rarely touched anymore, and found it there, the old letter. Folded once neatly, its edges yellowed, the ink faded to the color of smoke. The paper had softened from years of being moved, but never opened. I had written it one long night after she left, but I'd never sent it. Somehow, it had felt wrong to. Words written in sorrow often carry more of ourselves than we mean to give. I unfolded it carefully, the paper trembling between my fingers. The handwriting was familiar, but younger, tighter, more certain, as if it believed saying things aloud could make them last. "You said once that every rain has a song. I keep listening, but I can't tell if it's still yours or if I've forgotten how it goes." That's how it began. I remembered writing it, sitting by the same window, the same lamp humming faintly above me. The night she left, the rain had been relentless. Not angry, just endless. She hadn't taken much. Only her coat, her scarf, and the small portable record player she used to play on stormy nights. The one that used to hum softly, even after the power went out. If someday you hear the same melody again, maybe hum along. That way, I'll know you're all right. Those were the last lines. I never signed my name. I had folded the paper then, tucked it into the drawer, and left it there. Not as a goodbye, but as a promise to keep feeling. Now, decades later, it was strange how the words no longer hurt. They felt distant, like old footprints softened by the rain. The humming outside returned, faint but steady, the same tune threading its way through the storm. It almost sounded like her answer. I laid the letter flat on the desk and rested my hand over it. There was warmth in the gesture, a silent reconciliation between the person who wrote it and the person I had become. Regret no longer felt sharp, just quiet. It was the kind of ache that teaches you tenderness. The lamplight trembled slightly as wind brushed against the house. The scent of rain mixed with jasmine again, though I hadn't brewed tea tonight. Maybe the scent lived in the wood now, soaked deep into its grain, the way memories hide in small corners of our lives. I looked out the window. The world beyond had softened into a watercolor of blurred light and moving shadow. Somewhere, a streetlight flickered, and the reflection caught the edges of the letter like liquid gold. I thought about all the things we leave unsaid, not out of pride, but because the right words never arrive when the heart needs them. Maybe silence is the body's way of keeping what matters safe. I refolded the letter, but instead of putting it back, I left it on the table beside the lamp. It felt like it belonged to this night. A quiet relic returned to where it began. The melody outside swelled for a moment, rising and falling, before fading into the steady rhythm of rain. I imagined her somewhere, older now, perhaps still humming, perhaps not, and the thought brought an odd peace. We didn't need to speak again. The song had always been enough. I leaned back, listening to the soft percussion on the roof, the murmur of water against the gutters, the sighing wind that moved through the cracks of the house like breath. And in that stillness, I understood something simple. Some stories aren't about endings at all. They're about finding a quiet place for what once was, letting it rest, letting it hum softly beneath the sound of rain. The lamp flickered once more, casting a slow shadow across the letter. The storm deepened, not louder, but fuller, as if the sky itself was singing along. The rain was quieter that evening, as if the sky had grown tired of weeping, and now only whispered. I sat by the window again, the same one that had witnessed countless storms, and tried to remember when the melody first began, not in memory, but in life. Thought it was years ago, in that small apartment above the bookstore. The walls were thin, and the pipes groaned whenever it rained. I had just moved in, boxes still stacked, windows streaked with dust. On the first night there, the rain had arrived suddenly, spilling over the rooftops, finding its way through the gutters like an old friend. I'd been unpacking in silence when I heard it, the faintest humming, drifting through the open window from somewhere below Dot. It wasn't perfect, not polished, but it was steady and soft. A woman's voice, clear even through the downpour. She was humming to herself, not for anyone to hear. The melody rose with the thunder and dipped again as the storm quieted, like a tide. I remembered standing there, completely still, listening. It felt like stumbling upon a secret, one that wasn't meant to be discovered, but welcomed me anyway. The next evening, it returned. The same melody, the same voice. That's when I realized she lived in the apartment beneath mine. I never saw her that week, only heard her song when the rain came. It became a strange kind of comfort, knowing that when the clouds gathered, so would her tune. One afternoon, the sun finally broke through after days of drizzle. I went downstairs to collect the package, and saw her for the first time. She was by the doorway, watering a small pot of herbs, mint maybe, or basil. Her sleeves rolled to her elbows, hair damp from the humidity. When she looked up, she smiled politely, and I recognized her before she even spoke. "You're the one upstairs," she said, her tone light. "The one who listens." I laughed, caught off guard. "Is it that obvious?" "Rain carries sound easily," she said. "I don't mind. It's nice to be heard sometimes." Her voice was exactly as I imagined, calm, low, with that same unhurried warmth. We talked for a few minutes about the weather, about the bookstore downstairs that smelled of paper and dust. Then, before leaving, she added, "It's an old melody. My grandmother used to hum it when it rained." I suppose I picked it up. After that, it became our quiet ritual. When storms came, she would hum, and I would listen. Sometimes I'd make tea and set it by the window, as if sharing it through the air between us. I never asked for the song's name. Some things lose their magic when named. One night, after a particularly long storm, there was a knock on my door. She stood there, hair damp, holding a record player. "Power's out downstairs," she said. "Mind if I borrow your light?" That was the night I learned the melody's true shape. Not just a hum, but a song. She played the record. Soft piano notes beneath a quiet voice, old and crackling, the sound worn smooth by time. It was in another language, one neither of us understood. She hummed along anyway, eyes half closed, smiling faintly. "I used to think it was sad," she murmured, "but now I think it's just honest." That word stayed with me. Honest. A melody that carried no intention but truth. Now, years later, as I sat by the same window, though in a different place, a different life, I could still hear that first night. The pipes groaning, the record spinning, her voice blending with the rain. That was where the song began. Not just hers, but ours. The rain outside quickened for a moment, pattering against the sill like fingertips on piano keys. I smiled. The past had its way of playing itself again, but softer, slower, like a reprise that didn't seek applause, only remembrance. I looked up at the ceiling and whispered, almost to the rhythm of the drops. It was never just a song, was it? And in that quiet, as thunder rolled far away, it felt like she answered, not in words, but in a familiar hum that rose and faded, threading through the night until it became one with the rain again. It was raining again the night. I remembered our walk home, that first one when everything between us was still unspoken. The streets were slick with light, puddles reflecting the orange glow of passing cars. I had offered to walk her home after the bookstore closed. She hesitated, then smiled, nodding toward the window, where the rain blurred the world into watercolor dot. We shared a single umbrella, one of those small ones that never really kept you dry. She held it higher on her side, so my shoulder was half soaked within minutes. "You're terrible at this," I had joked, but she just laughed and tilted it slightly, though not enough to make a difference. The city around us was alive with sound rain tapping on metal awnings, tires slicing through water, the muffled rhythm of footsteps. But even among all that, I could still hear her humming. It was softer than the storm, just a thin thread of melody woven through the noise. I remember thinking then that it sounded like something the rain might have taught her a tune, shaped by patience and small joys. We stopped by a streetlight where the puddles shimmered like glass. She looked up, blinking away drops from her lashes. "You know," she said, "I like the rain. It makes everyone slower, kinder somehow." I nodded. "And quieter." She smiled at that. "Maybe that's why I hummed. It's like keeping company with the weather." For a moment, she looked at me as if searching for something, maybe understanding, maybe silence to match her own. I didn't know what to say, so I just listened. The umbrella leaned slightly between us, our shoulders brushing whenever the wind shifted. The air smelled of rain and roasted chestnuts from a vendor nearby, a scent that has never quite left my memory. We turned down a smaller street, lined with trees dripping silver in the lamplight. The water pooled in the cracks of the pavement, catching the reflections of branches and old balconies. Somewhere, a cat darted through the rain, shaking droplets from its fur before disappearing into a doorway. She began humming again, louder this time, her voice blending with the rain in a way that made it hard to tell where one ended and the other began. I found myself matching my steps to a rhythm 1, 2, 3, the quiet percussion of two people moving through a city softened by weather. When we reached her building, the rain had turned to mist. The umbrella was nearly useless by then. Our sleeves and hair were soaked. She stood by the gate, tucking a wet strand of hair behind her ear. "You should come in," she said, though there wasn't question in it, more like a kindness offered. I shook my head gently. "Maybe another time." "Another time, then," she echoed, smiling that quiet smile again, the one that felt both near and far. She paused, then asked, "Do you ever hum?" I laughed softly. "Only when I forget I'm doing it." "Good," she said. "That's when it means something." She stepped inside, leaving the gate ajar behind her, the melody still lingering in the air as she disappeared up the stairs. I stood there for a while, listening to the echo of her steps, the rain, the sound of a song too soft to follow. And I remember thinking, for the first time, how beautiful it was that something so small, a hum in the rain, could change the texture of silence forever. Now, years later, as the same rain whispered outside my own window, I could still feel that night beneath my skin. The wet pavement, the warmth of her sleeve brushing mine, the way the city seemed to hold its breath as she hummed. I reached for the window latch and opened it slightly, letting the damp air spill in. The scent of rain was the same, that blend of dust and life. I hummed the tune again, quietly, to no one, to everyone, to the memory itself. The melody found its shape in the sound of the rain, as if completing something left unfinished long ago. Maybe that's what memory does not preserve, but continue. Like a song passed from one storm to the next dot, and somewhere beyond the hum of the night, I thought I heard it again, another voice, faint and familiar, humming back. The bridge was small, the kind that people passed without noticing, more practical than pretty. It arched gently over a narrow river that wound through the old district, its water slow and brown in daylight, silver and soft at night. That evening, it had rained for hours, and the surface of the river rippled endlessly, turning every reflection into a trembling blur of light. We stood there, side by side, sheltered under her worn umbrella. The air smelled of wet stone and something faintly floral her perfume, maybe, or the blossoms that clung to the vines along the railing. The sound of the rain was softer here, falling more like a whisper than a storm. It was the kind of place where time seemed to pause, where you could hear your own heartbeat if you stayed quiet long enough. She was humming again, the same tune, the one that had followed us through every storm since that first night. Her voice drifted through the damp air, blending with the rain in a way that felt timeless. I didn't speak. I didn't want to break it. When she finally stopped, she turned to me and said, "If someday I'm not here, promise me you'll still listen to the rain." Her words came softly, not heavy with sadness but light, like they'd been rehearsed in her heart long before she spoke them. I smiled faintly, unsure what to say. "That's an easy promise." She tilted her head. "No, really listen. Not just hear it. Let it remind you that we were here once, that we stood here in this exact moment." I looked out over the river. The reflections of streetlights shimmered like tiny lanterns drifting downstream. "And what about the song?" I asked. She smiled. that quiet, faraway smile I'd come to know. The song will find you. It always does. We stood in silence after that, the kind of silence that feels full, like an unspoken prayer. Her hand rested lightly on the railing, the raindrops collecting along her sleeve, sliding down to her fingertips. I wanted to reach out, to hold that hand before it slipped away, but I didn't. Something in her stillness told me not to. The umbrella tilted slightly between us, and a few drops fell onto my shoulder. I didn't move. The coolness of the rain grounded me, kept me from drifting too far into the ache of what I already knew. That this would be one of those moments that stays, even when everything else leaves. She hummed once more, softly, like a farewell disguised as a tune. The melody wove through the rain, delicate and endless, until it was impossible to tell whether it came from her or from the world itself. When the song ended, she whispered, "You'll remember this bridge, won't you?" I nodded. Always. And I have. Even now, sitting decades later beside a different window, with the same rain whispering against the glass, I can still feel the echo of that night, the rhythm of water beneath us, the flicker of lamplight on her face, the warmth of her voice carried through the cold. Sometimes, I walk by bridges like that one, small, forgotten, crossed by hundreds of hurried feet each day, and I slow down. I listen. Often, it's quiet. Sometimes, though, I think I hear it again. The hum of her melody rising faintly from the water below. Perhaps promises don't always live in words. Sometimes they live in places, in bridges, in rain, in the way we keep showing up to remember. The river outside my window tonight sounds almost the same as it did then. Its gentle current tracing a lullaby. I still don't know the words, too. I smile at the thought that maybe, somewhere, she's listening too. That when the rain begins, she still hums. And for a few brief moments, across the vast distance of years, the melody finds its way back home. The years passed quietly, like pages turned by a slow breeze. The storms kept coming, as they always do, though their rhythm seemed to soften over time, less fierce, more forgiving. Life moved forward, quietly but insistently, carrying me with it. New streets, new windows, new cups of tea cooling beside new lamps. Yet through it all, the melody never quite disappeared, that it would come unexpectedly, a faint hum in the back of my mind when I least expected it. Sometimes while washing dishes, sometimes while walking home through drizzle, sometimes in the hush before sleep. I never tried to summon it. It simply arrived, like a memory that refused to fade completely. There were years when I didn't think of her much. Not out of forgetting, but out of gentleness. There's a peace that comes from allowing things to rest where they belong. But every now and then, especially on nights when rain brushed against the window in that particular rhythm, the past would open softly, and her humming would drift through. I grew older, as people do. The apartment I lived in then no longer exists. It was torn down, replaced by a glass tower. The bookstore closed. The bridge still stands, though smaller than I remember. Time has a way of shrinking things we once thought vast. And yet, even as everything else changed, that melody remained untouched. It had woven itself into my life in quiet ways. When I brewed jasmine tea, I caught myself humming it without realizing. When thunder rolled far away, I would pause and listen, half expecting to hear her voice rise between the raindrops. I came to think of the song as something that didn't belong to either of us anymore. It belonged to the rain. It had become part of the world's language, something it whispered back to those who needed to remember softness. One winter, years after I last saw her, I moved to a small town by the sea. The rain there was different, slower, gentler, as if careful not to disturb the stillness of the ocean. The first night in that house, the storm came, and as always, I heard it again, faint, distant, like the echo of a life that had once been mine. The melody filled the empty rooms, wrapping itself around the creak of the floorboards, the rustle of curtains, the soft ticking of an unseen clock. I didn't hum along that night. I just listened, my hand resting on the windowsill, the glass cool beneath my palm. It struck me then how strange it was, how something as simple as a song could carry through time, outliving places, people, and entire versions of ourselves. Perhaps that's the secret of melody. It doesn't age the way we do. It waits. Sometimes, on especially quiet mornings after the rain, I would find myself sitting by the sea, listening to the waves move with the same rhythm that once belonged to storms. The water would stretch endlessly toward the horizon, gray and calm, and I would think of her, not as someone lost, but as someone gently folded into the larger silence of life. I never tried to find her again. I suppose I feared breaking the magic of what remained. The memory was whole in its incompleteness, perfect in its distance. Still, when the wind shifted and carried the faint scent of rain inland, I always knew, somewhere, another storm was beginning. And perhaps, wherever she was, she would hum again, the same tune, the same small promise. Time, I've learned, does not erase tenderness. It only teaches it to speak more softly. Now, as the rain falls outside my window once more, I feel that quiet truth settle inside me. Some melodies are not meant to end. They become part of who we are, steady, patient, waiting to be heard whenever the world grows quiet enough. The teacup on my desk is empty, the lamplight dim. I close my eyes and listen. The storm deepens, and somewhere within its rhythm, her humming returns, not as a memory now, but as presence. And for the first time in years, I whisper the tune aloud, letting it weave through the room, letting it become mine again. It had been many years since I last walked through that part of the city. I hadn't planned to. Life has a way of pulling us along in directions that don't circle back often. But that afternoon, a meeting ended early. The rain began without warning, and I found myself wandering through streets I hadn't seen in decades. The air smelled the same, a familiar blend of wet pavement, old trees, and city dust washed clean. I passed the old bookstore's corner, now a cafe with tall windows and shelves of plants. The sign above the door read "The Blue Lantern." For a moment, I almost kept walking, but something, a quiet instinct, perhaps the rain itself, nudged me inside. The warmth hit me first, the faint scent of coffee mingling with wood and cinnamon. Then, through the low hum of conversation and the soft jazz from the speakers, I heard it, the melody, the one that had followed me across years and storms and silence. It was faint, but unmistakable, drifting from the far corner of the cafe. I turned slowly, and there she was. Older, yes, as we both must be. Her hair streaked with silver now, her shoulders wrapped in a pale shawl. But the posture, the calm way she sat with her hands folded around a cup, that was her. That was the same woman who once stood beneath an umbrella by a bridge, humming to the rain. She looked up then, as if sensing me before seeing me. Her eyes met mine, and for a moment, time lost its footing. The years folded like paper. The sound of the rain outside softened into the hush of the past returning home. I walked toward her, slowly, unsure what to say, how to fill the gap between then and now. When I reached her table, she smiled. "You found me," she said, her voice still gentle, still warm. "I think the rain did," I replied. She laughed softly, and that single sound brought everything back. The window, the tea, the melody threading through all of it. For a while, we said little. Words felt unnecessary again, just as they had all those nights ago. She poured me some tea from the small pot on her table. Jasmine, of course. The scent rose between us like the memory of something kind. "You still hum," I said quietly. "Always," she answered, "though not as often. The world got louder, you know." I nodded. And yet, somehow, I still hear it. We sat in the soft light of the cafe, the rain tapping gently against the windows. Around us, people spoke in low tones, pages turned, spoons stirred. But for us, there was only the quiet rhythm of shared breath and tea cooling between our hands. After a while, she said, "I wondered if you'd kept listening." "I did," I said. "Every time it rained." Her smile faded into something more thoughtful. "Funny, isn't it? How the small things stay, the ones we don't mean to keep." I wanted to tell her how her song had followed me, how it had become the soundtrack to years of silence, how it had comforted me in ways I never understood. But the words stayed where they were born, somewhere behind my ribs, steady but unsaid. Instead, I asked, "Do you remember the bridge?" Her eyes softened. Every detail. We both laughed quietly then, like people who had outlived their own sadness. The rain outside grew heavier, streaking the windows until the world beyond blurred into watercolor again. Without realizing it, she began to hum, just under her breath, soft and steady. The same melody, exactly as I remembered it. And then something unexpected happened. People nearby began to quiet. One by one, conversations faded, as if the entire cafe was pausing to listen. It wasn't that her humming was loud. It was simply alive, sincere, the kind of sound that reminded you to breathe. When she stopped, the silence that followed was almost luminous. She looked at me, eyes bright, and said, "See? The rain still listens." Outside, thunder rolled softly, not a warning, but a punctuation. Gentle, distant dot, you sat there until the rain eased and the light dimmed to gold. When it was time to go, she reached across the table and took my hand, her palm warm and fragile. "The melody will keep you company," she whispered. I wanted to tell her it already had. When I stepped outside, the rain had softened to mist. The world smelled of earth and jasmine and something like peace. Behind me, through the window, I saw her still sitting there, the lamplight around her soft as candle flamed out, and as I walked away, the tune began again, faint but clear, carried by the rain as it had always been. The next morning, the city woke beneath a pale, washed-out sky. The rain had stopped, but the streets still glistened, as though the storm hadn't entirely gone. It had simply hidden itself in reflections. I sat by my window again, the same cup of tea between my palms, trying to make sense of the quiet that followed her reappearance. It felt strange, how easily we had fallen back into stillness, as if the years apart had only been a breath held too long. There was no need to ask why she'd left or where she'd gone. Life, I realized, doesn't always give answers. It gives melodies, and we hum through them as best we can. That afternoon, I returned to the Blue Lantern. The place was nearly empty, the faint scent of coffee still clinging to the air. She was there again, at the same corner table, notebook open beside her cup. Her hair was tied loosely, silver strands escaping to frame her face. When she saw me, her expression warmed, calm as sunlight through thin curtains. "I thought you might come back," she said. "I wasn't sure if I should," I replied. "But the rain told me to." She smiled, as if that explanation made perfect sense. The rain has good instincts. For a while, we spoke about nothing about the weather, the taste of jasmine, the quiet pleasure of unhurried days. But beneath every word floated something unsaid, the kind of truth that only silence could hold. Finally, she looked down at her notebook, her fingers resting on the page. "I used to think the song was about sadness," she said softly. "But maybe it was about forgiveness." "Forgiveness?" "Yes," she said. glancing toward the window where new drops were beginning to gather. For all the things we didn't say, for leaving, for staying, for not knowing how to love properly, but trying anyway. Her words settled in me like rain soaking into soil quietly, completely. I thought of the letter still folded on my desk, of the bridge, the years, the storms, of how I'd carried her melody all this time, without realizing it had already forgiven me long ago. I asked, "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we hadn't let go?" She took a long breath before answering. "We might have stayed, but we might have lost the song. Sometimes holding on too tightly changes the tune." Outside, the rain began again, soft as memory. She smiled at it, tilting her head slightly to listen. I could see her lips move no words, just breath, the beginning of a hum. I joined her, barely audibly at first, our voices blending like two notes finding harmony after years of dissonance. The cafe owner paused mid-motion, smiling at the sound. A couple at another table looked up from their phones, listening. For a few moments, the whole room felt suspended in gentleness. When we finished, she laughed lightly. "You still hum off-key." "I know," I said, "but I never stopped trying." Her laughter faded into a sigh that wasn't sad, just full. "It's enough," she whispered. It's always been enough. We sat there until the light dimmed into evening. Before leaving, she tore a small page from her notebook and slid it across the table. On it, written in her careful hand, were only a few words. "When you hear the rain, know that I'm listening too." I wanted to ask if this was goodbye, but the question felt unnecessary. Some connections don't end. They simply change form. Like rain turning to mist dot, as I walked out, she stayed behind, the melody following me through the door. The rain greeted me again, soft, familiar, endless. I paused under the awning, letting the sound settle into my chest. There, between heartbeats, I understood. What had stayed unsaid between us didn't need to be spoken. It had already been carried by every storm, forgiven by every drop. I hummed once more as I stepped into the rain. And though I couldn't hear her anymore, I knew she was there, in the echo, in the quiet that finally felt like peace. That night, the rain returned, not fierce, not loud, just a slow, steady whisper that seemed to breathe with the earth itself. I left the window open, letting the sound wander freely through the room. It moved softly across the walls, touched. The pages of old books stirred the curtains as though curious to see what had changed. On the table, her note still lay where I had left it. "When you hear the rain, know that I'm listening too." I read it again, tracing each letter as if the ink itself might still hold the warmth of her hand. Something in those words felt like shelter, like the promise of being understood, even in silence. I poured myself a cup of jasmine tea and watched the steam rise into the lamplight. It twined like smoke, like a slow exhale from the soul. The scent filled the air, gentle and familiar, wrapping around me the way her melody once did. For years, I had thought of the song as something that haunted me. But that night, I realized it had been protecting me all along. It had filled the spaces between loneliness and longing, softened the sharp edges of time, reminded me to keep breathing when life grew too quiet. I began to hum again, without thinking. The notes were simple, almost childlike, yet they carried a strange strength and understanding that didn't need words. As I hummed, the room seemed to hum back, the rain tapping the glass in rhythm, the kettle whispering, the floor creaking in time with my breath. The melody wasn't hers alone anymore. It belonged to both of us now, and perhaps to the rain itself. It had become a kind of shelter, something steady and kind that lived inside sound. I walked to the window. The street below glimmered under the glow of wet lamps. A cat darted between puddles. Somewhere far away, a train rumbled like a slow heartbeat. Everything felt beautifully ordinary, and that was its own kind of miracle. When I closed my eyes, I could imagine her somewhere far away, doing the same perhaps, standing by her own window, tea in hand, listening. I could almost feel her presence in the air, light but certain, like the pulse beneath the rain. I whispered into the night, "Are you still listening?" The rain answered in its own way, by growing softer, more delicate, as if it too wanted to hear. I thought of all the storms that had come and gone, all the nights I had spent trying to find meaning in their rhythm. Now, at last, I understood. The melody wasn't about her voice, or mine, or even the past. It was about the way sound can hold us when touch cannot, the way memory becomes music, and music becomes home. I left the lamp on as I sat down again, notebook open, though I didn't write. I didn't need to. The rain was writing its own story, line by line, on the glass. Outside, a single car passed, leaving ripples in the puddles that mirrored the falling sky. Inside, the melody swelled just enough to fill the emptiness. It didn't ache anymore. It breathed, and I thought, maybe this is what love becomes after time has done its quiet work. Not a sharp flame, not even warmth, but something deeper, something that hums through us, quietly steady, long after the storm has gone. I let the sound cradle me as I drifted toward sleep. The last thing I heard before dreams took me was that familiar tune, hers, mine, the rains woven together, like threads of the same gentle truth. That what shelters us most isn't the roof above, but the song we carry inside. The morning after the long rain arrived pale and still. The clouds hung low, gentle as breath, and the world smelled clean, as if all its dust and sorrow had been quietly washed away overnight. I opened the window wider than usual, letting the cool air pour in. The curtains lifted softly, like sighs that had been waiting years to escape. It had been weeks since the day at the Blue Lantern. We hadn't seen each other again, though her note remained on my desk. Its edges curled slightly from the dampness in the air. I didn't need to read it anymore. I knew every line by heart. Sometimes I caught myself whispering it under my breath, not to remember, but to keep it alive. I had begun to notice small changes in the house, or maybe they had always been there, waiting for me to see them. The floor creaked differently in certain places. The clock's tick felt softer, and the air seemed to hum faintly in rhythm with the rain even on dry days. It was as though the melody had settled into the bones of the space, breathing quietly through everything. I spent that morning cleaning the shelves, wiping dust from the spines of old books. Each title carried a faint echo of who I used to be. Some pages still held dried petals, jasmine, pressed flat and fragile, from the evenings when she'd brewed tea and left blossoms to steep too long. I found an old record too, its surface scratched, the paper sleeve yellowed. I hadn't realized I still had it. It was the same record she'd brought to my apartment years ago, the one that had sung beneath candlelight when the power failed. I placed it on the turntable. The needle hesitated, then caught. The first few notes crackled, slow and tentative, before smoothing into that old, soft melody. It filled the room instantly, a wave of warmth that dissolved the silence, and then something inside me shifted, realized I didn't need to keep the windows closed anymore. I didn't need to guard the past like something fragile. The memories could breathe now. They had earned that dot, so I opened every window in the house. The air rushed through, cool and wet, carrying the faint scent of earth. The curtains swayed and sunlight spilled in, trembling on the floor like water. The song continued to play, blending with the quiet outside, the faint dripping from eaves, the soft hum of wind. For the first time in years, I didn't think of her absence as loss. I thought of it as continuation, a thread that never truly broke, only stretched. The rain, the melody, the tea, the bridge, the hum, all of it had lived on, quietly weaving itself into the shape of who I'd become. I picked up my notebook. The first page was still blank, as it had been for months. I dipped the pen and wrote just one line. When it rains, I open the window and let the past breathe. Then I stopped. That was enough. The record slowed, its final notes fading into the sound of wind outside. I didn't rush to play it again. Instead, I closed my eyes and listened, not just to the music, but to the space it had left behind. The gentle quiet that follows something beautiful is its own kind of grace. Outside, clouds began to part. A thin ray of sunlight broke through, catching the droplets on the window until they glowed like tiny pieces of glass. For a brief moment, the world felt transparent, like I could see straight through time, to the first night I'd heard her hum, to every storm since, to the soft calm now. The melody was gone, yet I could still hear it, not through sound, but through knowing. It was there, in the quiet rhythm of my breath, in the steady pulse beneath my skin. It would always be there. I smiled, leaning against the window frame, the cool wood pressing gently into my shoulder. The rain had done what it came to do. It had reminded me to open, to forgive, to let life move again. And somewhere far away, I imagined her doing the same, windows open, tea steaming, a quiet hum rising into the light. The storm that came that night was gentler than the others, less a tempest, more a lullaby. The kind of rain that didn't fall to break or cleanse, but simply to remind the earth to rest. I sat by the window once more, the lamplight warm against the gathering dark, and listened as the first drops began their soft conversation with the roof. The house was quiet. The clock had stopped ticking hours ago, though I hadn't bothered to wind it. There was no need for time in moments like this. Everything important had already slowed to the rhythm of the rain. I held the same porcelain cup as always, filled halfway with jasmine tea. The steam rose slowly, curling into the air like smoke from a faraway fire. It smelled of warmth, of continuity, of her. I thought of how many nights had passed like this, me, the rain, and the faint hum that always seemed to find its way back. Tonight, though, something was different. The melody wasn't coming from memory anymore. It was here, real, tangible, humming faintly through the air itself. I couldn't tell whether it came from the rain or from inside me. Perhaps it no longer mattered. The sound of thunder drifted low, like an old friend clearing his throat in another room. I smiled without meaning to. There was comfort in the predictability of storms, their beginning, their crescendo, their soft retreat. Maybe that's why I had always loved the rain. It understood how to leave gently as the melody swelled within the rain. I felt the weight of all those years settle in me. Not heavy, not sorrowful, just complete. I saw her face in memory's light, the way she once stood by the bridge, by the lamp, by the window. I remembered the words she'd left me, the promise she had written, the quiet faith that had kept me company long after her voice faded. And suddenly, I wasn't just remembering anymore. I was grateful. Grateful for every unfinished sentence, every silence we'd shared, every night that had taught me how to sit still with what remained. She had given me a gift, without knowing it, a way to find peace in incompleteness. The rain softened further, turning to mist. Each drop on the glass caught the lamplight and shimmered like small stars melting into the night. I opened the window and leaned out slightly. The air was cool and wet against my skin, full of that clean scent that only comes after forgiveness. Somewhere beyond the rooftops, the city breathed 1,000 windows, glowing like hearts still awake. The world, in all its impermanence, suddenly felt tender. I hummed quietly, the same tune she had once carried through storms and seasons. The notes came easily now, no longer trembling, no longer borrowed. They were mine too. The sound spread into the night, mingling with the falling rain, until it was impossible to tell when my voice ended and the world began. A soft wind brushed through the room, lifting a page from my open notebook. It fluttered once, twice, then settled. I glanced down and saw the last line I had written days before. When it rains, I open the window and let the past breathe. I traced the words with my fingertip, then closed the book gently. There was nothing left to add. Some stories don't need an ending. They just need a place to rest. The thunder rolled one last time, far away now, like a heartbeat retreating into distance. The rain slowed to a murmur. I could still hear the melody faintly, fading into the edges of sound, content to live there forever. And I thought, perhaps healing isn't about forgetting or moving on. Maybe it's simply about listening long enough for the storm to soften, about realizing that what once hurt can now hum quietly inside you without breaking anything. I took a slow sip of tea. It had gone cold, but it tasted right. The last drops tapped against the sill as if saying goodbye. I whispered back, "I'm still listening." And I meant it dark by morning. The rain had thinned to a whisper, a fine mist lingering over rooftops, gliding down tree branches like a farewell that refused to end. The world outside shimmered softly, washed clean, every leaf holding a bead of light. The air was cold enough to see my breath. I didn't mind. I had grown fond of these quiet hours when everything felt half dream. Half-dash memory. The house still smelled faintly of last night's tea. The lamp, left on until dawn, cast a pale golden circle on the wooden floor. Dust motes drifted lazily through the beam, tiny travelers caught in light. I sat by the window again, hands folded loosely around the empty cup, watching the last drops slide down the glass like the slow heartbeat of morning. It was then I noticed something. The melody was still there. Not loud, not distinct, but present in the rhythm of the day, waking up. The rain hummed it through the gutters. The sparrows seemed to echo its gentlest notes. And the kettle, as it began to boil again, joined in with a low, steady hum. The world had learned the song. Or maybe it had always known it, and I had only just learned to listen. I thought of her, of how she might be somewhere in another town. Another morning, perhaps standing by her own window, tracing the same kind of silence. Maybe she was humming too. Maybe we were both part of the same quiet orchestra the rain conducted, though we would never know. It struck me then how peaceful that not knowing felt. There was a time when I would have longed to see her again, to find the perfect ending, to close the circle. But some stories don't need circles. They need openness, the kind that lets wind and rain pass freely through, the kind that keeps the melody alive. I rose and opened the window wider. The air that entered was damp and cool, carrying the scent of earth, of wet stone, of distant thunder long gone. It felt like breathing in the past without pain. The world outside glowed a soft gray blue, the color of memory made kind. On the desk, her note still waited, edges curling slightly, ink beginning to fade. I didn't move it. I just looked at it and smiled. "I know," I whispered, though I wasn't sure what exactly I was answering. Her, the rain, or the silence that had become a friend. I closed my eyes and hummed the melody one last time. My voice was steadier now. Not beautiful, not perfect, but honest. It carried through the room and out the open window, rising into the thin silver air. I didn't need to hear it echoed back. The act of letting it go was enough. When the song faded, I simply sat there, feeling the world breathe around me. The trees swayed gently, the street shimmered under the retreating mist, and somewhere in the distance, a church bell rang, slow, resonant, like the punctuation of a long, gentle story. I took a final sip from the cup, cold tea, faintly floral. Then I set it down beside the window and left it there, as though offering it to the rain. The melody remained in the quiet, lingering like warmth in the air after someone has just left the room. As the day unfolded, the sky brightened. The last of the clouds drifted east, and sunlight spilled through at last, soft and forgiving. It touched the wet glass, turning the raindrops into scattered gold. I thought then, maybe that's what peace really is. Not the absence of rain, but learning to hum through it. The melody returned one final time, softer than ever, almost imperceptible, a faint thread running through the hush of morning. It wasn't hers or mine anymore. It belonged to everything. And as I sat there, watching light spread slowly across the room, I realized something simple, something quiet and complete. Every storm leaves behind a song. You just have to be still enough to hear it.